so worn down, you just think, oh, that's just, yet another item of harassment. And what's happened is that I was standing on the, we had a rooftop flat, and I was standing on our terrace, looking up through a glass roof, and I noticed that a helicopter was approaching, and it stopped above me. And I was looking up because it was very odd. It was right above my head. And then suddenly I felt these intense waves pass through my body. But it felt as if I was standing in a swimming pool close to these underwater water jets. Extremely intense pressure waves traveling through my body, coming from the helicopter with pressure downwards. And I was just standing there absolutely amazed. And this lasted for a couple of seconds. And I was calling out for my husband to come out. And by the time he did, this whole thing stopped, and the helicopter just flew off. And that was the very first time I was, I think, overtly, demonstratively irradiated with what I now know to be electromagnetic weapons.
And you knew right then and there that something had gone on, that something had been emitted, some signal or some pulse was emitted from the helicopter, and
yes.
You knew that there and then. But until that point, you're Oxford-educated PhD and research fellow. As bright as you are, you never heard about directed energy weapons, did you? You didn't know anything about any of that.
No, nothing. And I should also say is that the type of physics that I learned is also not even enough now to understand these new type of weapons. I mean, scalar waves and so on. That seems to be an entire research field in itself. And I have to say, I'd never heard about these, and also I couldn't have imagined that they are quite so powerful. That's the truth. I could have never imagined. And even after the scene with the helicopter, I thought, oh well, I knew it wasn't the the air blades because there was a glass roof. But even after that, I thought, oh well, yes. I mean, I suppose you can have electromagnetic waves of high intensity, and oh well, that's what they did. And well, I hope I won't have a heart attack. But
you must have mentioned this to your husband. You must have talked to him about this. What did he say?
Well, he couldn't believe it. So he was actually standing, I think, 10 meters away from me, and I shouted to him to come. But what these situations are like. At first, he doesn't know what the fuss is about, and by the time he's out, the helicopter was gone. And when I told him, he couldn't believe that this actually existed. And then he started arguing. I mean, he's a theoretical physicist, and he said, yes, but just think about the amount of energy you would have to put into a wave to move, your tissue and your skin. And I said, but believe me, this is what I felt. And you get into these sort of arguments. But I have to say, even as a high energy physicist, I couldn't have imagined that this is what these things actually feel like and how these things work.
That must have been very difficult for you. If I hadn't met David Icke, and if I hadn't read books by researchers like him and others, I wouldn't know anything about what those who work in the shadows are capable of doing to people. So if my fiancée, Catherine, had said to me the things that you were saying to your husband, the theoretical physicist, I love my fiancée, and I'm sure your husband loves you and loves you dearly, but I would be inclined to want my fiancée to go and seek professional psychiatric help. Again, the old me would have wanted to do that. Did your husband, was he really worried about your well-being, your psychological well-being?
At the time, I think, well, in the beginning, I don't think so. But then after a while, as I kept saying, look, these people are just harassing me. And the really nasty thing is that most of the harassment is actually done when there are no witnesses. So most of the conditioning and sensitization to certain triggers is purposefully done away from the presence of others. And it's exactly as you said. So eventually he said, no, this can't be true. And no, sorry, I think you're just too stressed. You should see someone. And he kept saying that ever more adamantly. And eventually I really had to, film things, and I was trying to film things, and I could puzzle things together. But it was and still is very, very hard. I mean, now what is happening to us, he still has extreme difficulties in actually admitting or even accepting that this is happening. And in those moments when he does, he breaks down.
You're still together, right? You're still together. Well, thank God for that. I just want to do a quick recap, Catherine. I want to remind our listeners, if you're just joining the programme, You've missed quite a lot. Dr. Catherine Horton is on the line to us from Switzerland. Now, she achieved a first-class Master of Physics and did her PhD in particle physics at Hertford College at the University of Oxford. She also worked as a junior research fellow at St. John's College in Oxford. She's been talking about having visited a court case every day for 6 weeks back in 2011 into early 2012, the Boris Berezovsky-Roman Abramovich contract row. Since then, she began to be stalked effectively by people that she believes are working for intelligence agencies. It began as a kind of a pantomime, as she said, her recognising people regularly standing at the end of her driveway, following her in the streets, following her on the train. This was ramped up. It became a bit more sinister, people smiling at her, wanting her to know that they were there, but not in any way, at that particular time anyway, physically intimidating her. It escalated when she went to Germany. Catherine believes and is convinced that she is being targeted by direct energy weapons there. She has obviously spoken to her friends, family and to her husband about this. And Catherine, if I'm right, you have been saying on your website that you are sure that your family and your friends have been used as target practice by these very weapons. Tell us about that. So they've not just directed these weapons at you, you believe, but also at people very close to you. Are they aware of that? Have they spoken about that?
I don't think they are. And to be honest, I wasn't even aware in the beginning. So I have to say, so for the entire year, I was targeted in Germany. So I had this heart problem and I didn't know what it was. And another time I had a headache and it also disappeared the day I went to have an MRI. And at the time, I didn't know anything about microwave weapons or directed energy weapons. But by that time, I already had enough of the stalking, and I was trying to reach out to lawyers and try to do something about that and have that, brought to an end.
You even, sorry to interrupt you, you even contacted at some stage the GCHQ, and you basically, I think this is brilliant. You got in touch with these agencies and said, leave me alone. Stop doing what it is you're doing. Isn't that right?
That's right. So I did that a bit later. So at first I was just using the classical route and I was trying to get a lawyer. And then what happened, and this is essentially how insidious it is, they targeted my family and even my friends and my best friend's mother every single time I contacted lawyers. So it was very hard to find lawyers. And to this day in Germany, I didn't manage to find a single lawyer who was willing to take up this case. But every time I met a lawyer, I would a week later find out that something had happened to my friend or my friend's mother that day. And it was always extremely unusual things. So what I mean by that... Give us an example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the examples, and this just shows you how extreme it is. And this is why it's so extreme at first you don't understand. It's only in retrospect that when you start being targeted properly, that you suddenly the picture falls into place. So what happened is that just by the by, my sister would, for example, tell me that one of her bikes got stolen, and then another bike would be stolen, and the third bike would be stolen, and then my brother's jacket would be stolen. There would be this series of thefts, for example. Then my best friend just told me, my mother developed these weird heart problems and she just doesn't know what it is. And I think she went to every single cardiologist, but no one could find anything. And she said it was extremely odd because her mother would be just sitting somewhere on a sofa and suddenly her heart started racing uncontrollably. And without her being able to control it or see a reason for that. So,
and you suspected this has got to be to do with what's happening to me.
At the time, I didn't even do that. It was only when they did that to me, and after a lot of harassment and a lot of very overt targeting, that I actually figured this out. And but when I started seriously doubting was when the mother of my best friend, who was in her 70s, was struck by lightning on a clear day in the middle of a major city.
You're shitting me. Hang on a second. The mother of your best friend was struck by lightning.
Almost struck by lightning. So she was scared to death because, and this is, if you're a physicist, you can see
on a clear day, right?
Yeah, on a clear day. And she was crossing the road and there were these ginormous stones as a barrier placed across the street. And as she was crossing, She was there with a friend, so there was even a witness, and she was crossing the road, and suddenly lightning struck into the stone next to her, which was, I mean, roughly knee height. And that between tall buildings on a clear day. Now, that is impossible.
Well, officially, we're supposed to believe that our governments are not able to manipulate the weather, officially, but we know better than that. Not that we know everything, we don't know everything, but we know they can certainly do that. You're aware of that now, right?
Well, what I'm aware of, it's actually much simpler than that. You don't even have to steer the weather. All you need is basically a window on the first floor, and there's something you can Google it. It's called the company's called Applied Energetics, and they produce something that's called laser guided energy, and it's very simple. Essentially, a laser that ionizes a beam line, and then you just produce a discharge of current along this ionized beam path. So where you shot the laser just before, you will then pass this current, and you can essentially very precisely target lightning at anything, including a stone, next to a person.
Yeah.
So if it had been real lightning, it should have hit my best friend's mother, not the stone, because she was higher.
She must have got a terrible fright, right? I mean, anybody would do.
Yeah, and that's essentially it. And I remember that distinctly because she did claim to have these heart problems. And I almost wonder if this was essentially just, again, weapons or, medical testing. They upset people's hearts, and then they see how durable these hearts are. I mean, it's sick.
We spoke today briefly, and I haven't a clue why this has happened and is happening to you, but it doesn't stop us speculating a bit. And hearing people telling me stories like this over the last few years and reading them in books written by credible authors, there's a number of things this might be about, and I know listeners are tweeting a lot of emails. This is huge for our audience. They're very interested in this. Somebody thinks that you've got information is one scenario. Somebody very powerful, or some entity, some body of people or group believes that you're a threat to them because you have information. Maybe you're aware of, maybe you're not aware of it. Sounds like more like you wouldn't be aware of it, and is screwing with you, but in a very, very, very serious way. Another theory, and I've been asked to put this to you, and you might think this is outlandish. It's not a theory, it's more a question. What about your genealogy? What about your ancestral path? Have is your family tree connected to powerful people at all? That's probably a better way of putting it, isn't it, Catherine? Connected to royal families or powerful people. Don't think I'm being a complete idiot now. It's something worth considering. What is your? I don't want to use the word bloodline, but what is your genealogy, your heritage, your family tree? Where does it go? Does it go to powerful people, rich people, bankers, money people, royalty maybe?
The truth is, I
don't know.
So I don't think so. So I was born in Transylvania, which these days belongs to Romania, and my parents are Hungarians and Germans. So we essentially fled communist Romania in the mid-'80s, and we became immediately German citizens because my grandparents were German and they spoke German. So we were considered repatriates, not even refugees. And so my grandparents spoke German, but the other part of the family is Hungarian. And the Hungarian side is connected to aristocracy, but we're going back to the 13th century or 14th century. So